You're scrolling through social media at 2 a.m., feeling completely lost. Your life feels like random events happening to you, not a coherent story you're actively living. You have achievements, relationships, experiences, but somehow it all feels meaningless, disconnected, like scenes from different movies edited together badly. Here's what Carl Jung discovered that most people never realize: you're not having a life crisis, you're having a story crisis. Without a meaningful narrative to organize your experiences, the human psyche fragments. We don't just want stories for entertainment, we need them for psychological survival. This isn't about escapism or fantasy. Jung found that myths and stories are the psychological immune system of humanity. They're how we process trauma, find meaning in suffering, and discover who we're meant to become. When you lose connection to the archetypal stories that give life shape, you don't just feel confused, you feel spiritually sick. But here's the profound part: the same stories that have guided humanity for thousands of years are still operating in your life right now. You just don't know how to read them. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your personal struggles might actually be mythic journeys, and how recognizing that changes everything. If you're searching for deeper answers, don't just watch, join us. Subscribe, like, and add your voice in the comments. Jung realized something revolutionary: the human mind doesn't just tell stories, it is a story. Your sense of self isn't a fixed thing, it's a narrative you're constantly creating and revising. But most people are terrible storytellers when it comes to their own lives. Think about how you explain your problems to friends. My relationships always fail. I never get the opportunities I deserve. I'm just unlucky. These aren't just descriptions, they're story frameworks that trap you in repetitive patterns. Jung saw that myths aren't ancient curiosities, they're psychological blueprints. Every culture has stories about heroes facing impossible odds, about death and rebirth, about the journey from innocence through suffering to wisdom. These aren't metaphors for life, they're literally how psychological growth works. The hero's journey that Joseph Campbell described isn't just found in Star Wars and Harry Potter. It's the structure of every therapeutic breakthrough, every major life transition, every moment when you stop being who you were and become who you're meant to be. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss: you can't just choose any story. The stories that heal are the ones that connect you to something larger than your personal drama, to archetypal patterns that have guided human transformation for millennia. Jung discovered that symptoms, depression, anxiety, addiction, relationship patterns, aren't just problems to solve. They're often stories trying to complete themselves. Your recurring nightmare isn't random, it might be your psyche's attempt to process an incomplete mythic pattern. Consider the myth of Persephone, dragged into the underworld and forced to spend half her year in darkness. Jung would say this isn't just an ancient story, it's a template for how the psyche handles trauma, depression, and the journey back to light. When someone says "I feel like I'm in a dark period of my life," they're not just using metaphor. They're unconsciously recognizing that their experience follows an archetypal pattern of descent, transformation, and eventual return. The stories that he'll do three things. First, they normalize your suffering by showing it's part of a universal human pattern. Second, they provide a map for what comes next. Myths have structure, beginning, middle, and resolution. Third, they connect your personal pain to something sacred and meaningful. This is why therapy often falls short when it only focuses on symptoms without addressing the larger story. Jung found that healing happens when people discover they're not just victims of random circumstances, they're heroes in their own mythic journey, even if they don't recognize it yet. Your addiction might be your version of the wasteland that must be crossed. Your failed relationships might be your odyssey, a long journey toward understanding what home really means. Your career struggles might be your dragon that must be faced to claim your authentic power. Now, which of these ancient patterns is running your life right now? Because Jung identified 5 specific archetypal stories that keep appearing, and one of them is probably yours. First, there's the wounded healer. Have you ever noticed how your deepest wounds often become your greatest source of wisdom? If you've experienced trauma, depression, or loss, this archetype suggests your suffering isn't meaningless, it's preparation for helping others navigate similar darkness. Think about it, who better to guide someone through addiction than someone who's been there themselves? But maybe you're living a different story. Ever feel like you're constantly dying and being reborn? That's the death-rebirth cycle. Every major life transition follows this pattern. The old self must die for the new self to be born. If you're going through divorce, job loss, or identity crisis, you're not failing, you're in the mythic death phase that precedes rebirth. The question is, what's trying to be born in you? Or perhaps you recognize yourself in the shadow integration story. Every hero must face their dark side. Your self-destructive patterns, your jealousy, your rage, these aren't character defects to eliminate. They're shadow aspects that need to be integrated, not destroyed. What if your worst qualities actually contain the seeds of your greatest strengths? Then there's the sacred marriage archetype. This isn't about romantic relationships, it's about integrating opposite aspects of yourself. Masculine and feminine, rational and intuitive, strength and vulnerability. Most people's relationship problems reflect incomplete inner integration. Are you trying to find in others what you haven't developed in yourself? Finally, there's the return. After the hero's journey, you must bring the treasure back to ordinary life. Your insights, your healing, your growth, they're not just for you. The mythic pattern demands that you share what you've learned. What wisdom are you hoarding that the world needs? So which story resonates most with your current struggles? Because recognizing your pattern is just the beginning. Jung didn't just analyze myths, he developed practical ways to work with them therapeutically. Here's how you can apply this to your own healing, and trust me, this gets immediately practical. First, reframe your story. Instead of asking why do bad things keep happening to me? Ask what mythic pattern might I be living? Your struggles aren't random, they might be necessary stages in a larger transformation. What if your depression is actually a call to adventure that you haven't recognized yet? Next, find your archetypal match. Which mythic figures resonate with your current situation? Are you Odysseus trying to find home? Persephone learning to navigate darkness? The Fisher King whose wound reflects a spiritual crisis? When you identify with a mythic figure, you gain access to the wisdom embedded in their story. Here's something crucial, honor the pattern. Myths have timing. You can't rush the hero's journey or skip the dark night of the soul. Understanding archetypal timing helps you stop fighting necessary stages and start cooperating with the deeper process. Maybe your anxiety isn't something to eliminate, maybe it's information about where you are in your mythic journey. Try this, use Jung's technique of active imagination. Dialogue with mythic figures in your mind. What would Athena tell you about your career decisions? What would the wise woman archetype say about your relationship patterns? This isn't just fantasy, it's a way of accessing archetypal wisdom that lives in your unconscious. Pay attention to your dreams. They often contain mythic elements. That recurring dream about flying, being chased, or losing something important, these might be personal versions of universal mythic themes. Your psyche is trying to tell you something through the language of myth. Finally, create ritual. Myths aren't just mental, they're embodied. Creating simple rituals around life transitions helps you consciously participate in archetypal patterns instead of being unconsciously driven by them. Here's what Jung understood that modern psychology often misses: healing isn't about returning to who you were before. It's about discovering who you're meant to become through the story you're living. Your depression might not be a disorder, it might be a call to adventure that you haven't recognized. Your anxiety might not be pathology, it might be your psyche's way of saying the old story no longer fits and you need a bigger narrative. This doesn't mean dismiss therapy or medication when needed. It means understanding that the deepest healing often happens when we discover we're not victims of meaningless suffering. We're protagonists in stories that have been told for thousands of years because they map onto something essential about human transformation. The myth you need might not be one you choose consciously. Often, Life chooses the myth for you through the circumstances you face. Your job isn't to pick a better story, it's to recognize the story you're already in and learn to participate in it consciously. When you understand that your struggles are mythic, everything changes. You stop asking why me? And start asking what is this experience trying to teach me? You stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as in process. Jung believed that the goal of life is individuation, becoming who you truly are. But you can't do that without stories to guide the process. The myths that have guided humanity's psychological development for millennia are still available to guide yours. The question isn't whether you need stories to heal, you're already living one. The question is whether you'll recognize it and let it transform you.